Happy New Year if you happen to celebrate the incrementing of year counts on the same arbitrary Western calendar as YouTube, because it's over a month before the Year of the Dragon begins, and in the Hijra, 1446 doesn't start until July. But if you happen to count from an arbitrary point in the reign of the Roman client King Herod using a corrected solar calendar, then 8 days and 16 hours ago, it was a new year. I've considered talking about that a few times. There's a moment when that was invented. I don't mean calendars. Obviously, the cyclical nature of seasons inspired calendars, and they're very, very old. But eras, the idea of taking a fixed point in time and counting from there forwards, that's a surprisingly recent development. That's less than 2,500 years old. Anyway, as arbitrary as such a point in time is, I find it useful to have an episode where I stop and reflect, or at least record into a microphone a carefully reworked draft of my reflections. To begin with, let's talk about the schedule. I put the very first thing that I uploaded on YouTube in 2013, but when I talk about the schedule, I mean the colour-coded historical perspective bits that I started doing in 2019. At first, there wasn't a schedule to those. Then I began to make them monthly. If we're talking about arbitrary milestones, and I'm definitely talking about arbitrary milestones in this episode, the 50th episode, 52 months after the first one appeared, was on R.S. Sharma's feudalism, and that was in November. I'll talk about the modest response to that in a bit. Anyway, I was going to tell you about the schedule. I don't actually make this stuff on a schedule. I feed it into a behind-the-scenes buffer, and it gets released on pre-programmed dates, which could be a lot later. At the time of writing, I've actually finished 3 yellow episodes on Ibn Khaldun's reception as an economist, on units of account and inscriptions, and on the myth of barter. And I've scripted one on numismatic catalogues. And I'm currently trying to work out a way to talk about how you write economic history from coins. A really interesting question that a viewer raised. Because broadly I've come to think of the yellow episodes as thematically general numismatics and economic history. That theming helps me not get hyper-focused on a single topic. Amongst those, the episode on units of account on the Nasik cave inscriptions in Western India was actually written in 2022 and recorded at the beginning of 2023, but it won't appear until June of 2024, which gives you a sense of just how long the gap from my work to you seeing the final product can actually be. And that way of working is really useful to me. It lets me do what I fancy, but still have a regular schedule, so I don't get the stress that comes with a long hiatus and the feeling I really ought to be doing something, or the stress that comes with a deadline because there is an episode due and I don't have anything ready. Today there is an episode due and I don't have anything ready. That's actually deliberate. I wanted to do an episode like this in January, but I didn't want to write it until December. Yeah, it's a little bit stressful and it's a good reminder of why I don't do it this way normally. But this episode needed to be done this way. Anyway, the calendar months didn't really work for me, and I made a mostly invisible change to every 4 weeks on a Tuesday, fairly early in the production of the videos. But in 2023, I had accumulated a very large buffer. And because I had accumulated that large buffer, I increased the schedule to every 3 weeks, starting with an episode Issa and I did on ChatGPT, meaning 5 extra episodes this year. If you noticed, and you've gotten used to that, you're going to think this episode is a week late, because in December, I actually have 2 slots without episodes. This one I'm recording here, and a green slot that follows it, which are often the Key Work series, and I will be talking about those, but in this case might be about the foundation of the Order of Bhikshunis in China. I say might be because that was the plan, but it may not happen. Just to explain, I don't mind making mistakes. That's something that happens in research. Most research is wrong. But I don't like writing blind. And partway through preparing that episode, and I think there are really interesting things to say about the foundation of the orders of Buddhist nuns, and when and where and why that happened and what the agency in those events was. Interesting things that I think need to be tempered with a certain respect for the struggles of women today to found new orders of nuns. But partway through that process, Isa spotted a footnote that suggested there might be a relevant bit of information buried in a PhD thesis, and I only got hold of that thesis yesterday. And that's going to take me a while to read. And this happens. Last year, I think I said I would do an episode on Carlo Ginzburg and the cheese and the worms. And I didn't, because the book turned out to be deceptively complex. It's quite slim. It's an easy read. There are elements of it that are clearly aimed at a general audience, and it has been successful with the general audience. And I didn't expect the depth of stuff in it that I didn't understand. And the best way to get your head round something that you don't understand is to take a break from it and come back at it from another angle. So I took a break, and then a few weeks ago I had a long train journey, and I took 2 different English translations with me and carefully marked them up on that journey. And I think the gap on that process made things clearer for me, which is good because I think microhistory is an important historiographic moment, and I want to talk about it and this book in relation to it. But yeah, now that I have gaps in the buffer, I'm going to go back to every 4 weeks. And I'm going to be flexible on this in the future. I intend to accelerate or slow the schedule based on the size of the buffer and the effect it has on my stress meter, keeping it to every X weeks on a Tuesday. Which is all pretty dull scheduling stuff and raises an important question. How on earth did I squander that buffer in the first place? As I've mentioned, my basic philosophy here is to make things I enjoy making. And both because I had done enough to have a buffer and because I needed a bit of self-care, I gave myself a treat. I indulged in a long piece of reading for the aforementioned episode on Ibn Khaldun. It was enormously self-indulgent. I spent time going back over the way Ibn Khaldun has been understood and responded to as an economist, which was the subject of the very first video I did, a video I wasn't happy with and removed some time ago. And the result is an hour and a half long. That is twice the length of the Great Quantification video I did last year, which is the longest thing I've posted to this point. Isa is absolutely convinced none of you will watch it. She was all for me splitting it up into about 3 or 4 different parts. And I didn't because this was really about rewarding myself for the success of sustaining a schedule and establishing a buffer and, of course, using that buffer to then give myself the treat of being able to spend several months just working on one particular thing. I'm sure she's right. She always is. And I do normally change things when she tells me to. As for the topical structure, that is definitely going to stay. As I said, I find it useful, and the stats I get suggest people who are watching it also find it useful. For example, fewer subscribers click on red videos than yellow or blue, suggesting that at least some of the audience has worked out that those tend to be about dye studies, and then just not very interested in dye studies. The complex system that YouTube uses, and any platform like this has to use to connect consumers and creators of content, is often referred to as the algorithm. And the algorithm and I have frequent fights over how much I should care about people clicking on things. Being seen by lots of people isn't a criteria by which I measure the success of the videos. Not a lot of people watch videos about dye studies. That is never going to change. That does not mean dye study videos aren't important. They absolutely are. They're the only way you can learn about this stuff, unless, like me, you had the enormous privilege to apprentice in one of the major numismatic cabinets. The internet has had a democratizing effect on knowledge. It has broken down a lot of, not all, but a lot of the barriers to who can produce knowledge and who can consume it. If you want, you can access talks or papers that at one time would only have been available to members of learned societies or students of elite institutions. But the algorithm isn't keen on that. Or rather, it doesn't act that way. It's just a bundle of protocols and directives. It doesn't actually have any feelings on the matter. The algorithm pushes hard to try and get me to chase the types of video that create the most engagement. The types of video that depend least on my specialist knowledge. It's not subtle about it either. If a video is doing well from the algorithm's point of view, I get a little fireworks display when I log in. But the things it wants me to chase are the things I have least to add relative to everybody else who's capable of doing a video on the same topic. Let me illustrate how dramatic this is by showing you the 4 most popular episodes of Historical Perspective in 2023. Most of them are not from 2023, obviously, because videos that were released this year had less time to accumulate views. One of them is my discussion of Marshall Sahlins' The Original Affluent Society, and they all have something in common. If you answered green backgrounds, fair enough, they have 2 things in common. The most popular videos are the key works or related talks, in which I discuss a particular piece of work by a particular author, which is kind of obvious. They have the broadest appeal. They don't tend to be massively successful when they are released, which suggests they are not the thing that my subscribers most want to see. I get quite a lot of stats, and it's very noticeable there's a pattern. They proceed quite modestly for a period, and then 3 to 9 months after I post them, there's an inflection point, and suddenly the videos are regularly getting viewers every day. If I had to take a guess, and I would be guessing, I think that's Google. I think there are people looking for an introduction to Hayden White's metahistory or Block or Angel or Sahlins, and that is the moment when, for whatever reason, Google starts connecting them with the videos. Which is kind of an important point. When we talk about the algorithm, we're not talking about some single computer, but about the emergent properties of a system that consists of millions of people and a whole range of computers, each one with its own incentive structure. Is that a problem? Well, let me point out something else those videos have in common. They are all about dead white guys. That isn't me. I was very pleased when I spotted that pattern, which was when the R.S. Sharma and Barbara Tuchman videos did not do well, to go back and check and discover about half of my videos are about people who don't fit that description. Yeah, if I wanted to get anywhere near the actual demographics of the human race, that really shouldn't be 50-50, but my expectations weren't high, and I was pretty pleased with 50-50. How do I know the deceased Western men are getting all the attention? Like I said, I get stats, and I can take the product of how many people look in a month and how long on average they watch for, and the 6 highest videos by that standard are pretty lopsided. And that does bother me. This is not a new problem. People have noted that deceased European men dominate academic discourse before, and they've been frustrated with how difficult it seems to be to reverse that. Right now, I want to draw attention to what the algorithm is telling me to do. Because make no mistake, YouTube is not investing programming time and processing power collecting all those stats to satisfy my idle curiosity. It wants me to know what generates engagement so that I can chase it. Every time I log in, it wants me to know these videos get very few views, but it also wants me to know that it thinks I should stop talking about women and people who don't come from European or North American backgrounds. That if I did 17 episodes a year about privileged male writers who are currently pushing up daisies, which, just saying, would be a lot less work than what I actually do, that I would have at least 10 times the engagement that I currently do. As I suggested, I think this is complicated. We've all heard stories of AIs and other algorithms going feral and homing in on all the worst aspects of human behaviour. But I don't think that's what's going on here. The YouTube algorithm is all over the place in terms of how often it recommends things to people. There is no notable skew on that criteria. I tell you what there is. There is a big discrepancy in how long the average viewer watches for. Maybe that's me. Maybe I'm just bad at writing about people whose life experiences and background don't line up with my own. If it is, that's a pretty depressing thought. But I'm not sure that it is me. One colleague thought it was a quality thing, They thought the massive discrepancy in privilege that dead men enjoyed meant there was just a lot more of them. And when I skimmed off the top to pick subjects, the stuff I was skimming off was just better. Isa isn't chiming in here because she's travelling and can't record anything, but she thought it's to do with fame. They're already known, so people look for them, and people aren't as likely to stick around for the stuff they aren't looking for, so they turn off more quickly when they encounter this, at least at a statistical level. I wondered to what extent it's to do with the lists other people make. If the inflection is being caused by Google, then am I seeing the effect of what students are being directed to? Does Hayden White get onto more reading lists than Barbara Tuchman? Just to be clear, it's not just the algorithm that thinks I should chase this sort of engagement. I've had at least one person tell me quite directly that I'm stupid for writing about what I think is important, that I should do what the algorithm tells me and only write about things that bring in an audience. Anyway, I won't be doing that. I'm always amenable to suggestions, but I think it's probably healthy for me to do what I enjoy and to measure the success by something other than the stats panel. Specialist knowledge has a purpose, and regurgitating accessible summaries of the same small canon is not a net positive. So yes, there will be Die Studies episodes. There will be little shorts on historical theory. As we've discussed, there is definitely going to be some numismatics and some economic history. There will still be some key works episodes, and I'm suspecting, looking at my notes, that Buddhist nuns will feature in a couple. I hope you enjoy some of it, and that you don't mind me taking a moment to reflect on 2023.